Right, well, let's return to that breaking news. A man has been arrested after an 11-year-old girl and a 34-year-old woman both stabbed in London's Leicester Square. That's according to the Metropolitan Police. We have just obtained this video of the scene of the incident, the scene of the crime. Here you can see Leicester Square, a large area of that central London square covered in cordons from the police officers there. And the crowd has obviously dispersed. That is usually a very busy area of London.
And of course, apologies if any viewers find this distressing. This is, of course, the aftermath of a daylight stabbing in central London. The hat of the attacker is left there just sort of lying in the middle of this crime scene. Of course, a man has been arrested, is in police custody, and of course the area is cordoned off. Hard to overstate how central this is. A short walk from Downing Street, a very popular tourist destination, the site of film premieres, lots of cinemas and attractions. We understand that this particular site here is just outside Lego World. There it is. This is a place for families. This is a place for tourists. This is a thriving and busy place, particularly during the summer holidays for schools, as we are now. To emphasise, that's an 11-year-old girl as well as a 39-year-old woman. Now, the London Ambulance Service have released a statement as well. The spokesperson, they said, we were called at 11:36 on Monday, the 12th of August, today, to reports of a stabbing at Leicester Square. We sent resources to the scene, including an ambulance crew, an advanced paramedic and an incident response officer. We also dispatched members of our tactical response unit. We treated a child and an adult at the scene and took them to a major trauma centre. And yes, as you can see, this police cordon has been put in place surrounding those major shops, the TWG tea shop, as well as the Lego store and in front of the M&M store. Apparently also families and tourists are still standing in queues for each, so hasn't been completely shut off from tourists and people, but as you can see, a large area there cordoned off by the police. Very, very shocking. And indeed, that news that the two victims have been taken to a major trauma centre does perhaps give us an indication of the severity of this stabbing. Of course, a deeply, deeply severe incident. And just to correct myself, I believe I said a 39-year-old woman a little bit earlier. A 34-year-old woman was the other victim, an 11-year-old girl and a 34-year-old woman. Shocking. We're now joined by former Scotland Yard detective Peter Bleksley. Peter, to hear of yet another stabbing incident in our capital made all the more shocking that this incident, broad daylight, 11:36, the ambulance were called to the scene, broad daylight in the very centre of our capital.
Here we go again, regrettably. Lawless Britain, the absolute epidemic of knife crime that plagues our nation. Building on what Tom said, Leicester Square, yes, world-renowned cinemas, theatres, restaurants, casinos, and far more tourist attractions. It is the epicentre of the tourist industry for the UK. And headlines of this dreadful attack, and of course, I wish both of the victims all the very best in their recovery, I hope. Headlines of this will go around the world, simply every corner of the earth, because Leicester Square is world-renowned. Once again, Lawless Britain having its shredded reputation shattered.
It is worth emphasising how shocking this is. Peter, in your experience, daylight stabbings like this, my goodness me, I can only think back to what we saw 2 weeks ago in Southport. It harks back, particularly because the victims are a woman and a girl, and it happened, well, at 11:36 in the morning. I remember sitting here at this desk 2 weeks ago when the Southport stabbings happened. That was at 11:56, if I remember correctly. Again, broad daylight. Is this a new phenomenon in Britain?
I don't think it's a new phenomenon, but it's a growing scourge. As you clearly said, only 2 weeks after Southport, here we are again. And yet Leicester Square is the centre of so much crime. Pickpocketing, robbery, antisocial behaviour, and much, much more. And unfortunately, it is largely left to private security companies to try and keep Leicester Square safe. It should be an area with a 24-hour police presence. Now, we know thousands of police officers are elsewhere on standby for any other outbreaks of violent disorder, rioting, in other words. But even when they're not, this area is not regularly foot patrolled by the police, and is yet, regrettably, another example of the police in the UK surrendering the streets to the criminals, and this, sadly, is the lawlessness that follows.
I mean, Peter, people who don't regularly go into Leicester Square or central London will probably be taken aback by what you've just said, that this area of central London, where there are so many businesses, so many tourists, local residents too, the epicentre of our cultural life. Here we're just looking at live pictures of Leicester Square. As you can see, the police have cordoned off a large area right slap bang in the middle of Leicester Square by that Lego store and by a big tea shop there as well. There's the M&M store there close by as well. But you say that this isn't regularly or continuously policed.
No, it's down to private security companies that actually arrest, detain a lot of people in and around Leicester Square. Because so many tourists go there, criminals know that they can prey upon them there. And it really is an area of central London for all the attractions, for all the joy that can be rinsed out of a trip going there. You have to be on red alert for your safety and the safety of others with you. I'm afraid that, yet again, is another state of our lawless nation.
And yet, Peter, there is a suspect who has been apprehended, who is in custody as we speak. I mean, this could potentially have been a lot worse had there not been police who were able to get there, presumably in reasonable time, given the arrest.
We shall have to wait and see. Details are very scant at the moment. But if I was a gambling man, of which I'm not, I would suspect that the original detention of this person might well have come from private security teams.
And Peter, of course, our first thoughts are with the victims, one of whom is very young indeed, just 11 years old, and also a 34-year-old woman. But you mentioned, too, the impact this has on our international reputation. I mean, looking at the level of crime and what appears to be an increase in knife crime, particularly in our capital, it doesn't serve our country well, does it, Peter?
Not just an increase in knife crime in our capital, but throughout so many of our major cities across the UK. And I have been speaking to yourselves and many others for some years now about this scourge of knife crime. What our police and what our CPS and what our courts have shown recently is that when there is the political will, they can act swiftly to arrest, detain, gather evidence, prosecute, and see people convicted in the courts. It is rampant neglect by our criminal justice system that has allowed the knife crime surge to get to where it is, a 78% increase in the last decade. And that's just the recorded crimes that they know about. It is long overdue for our entire criminal justice system and the politicians to put as much effort into the knife crime epidemic as they has recently done to the rioting on the streets of the UK. It is that serious.
Now, Peter, of course, we're looking at live pictures of Leicester Square, of the scene of this incident right here. Talk us through what we're seeing. The police have obviously cordoned off a large area of a very, very busy square. What will the police response be doing here? Presumably forensics and working out precisely what went on.
Yes, they've cordoned off an area here, and clearly they've gone for safety first in terms of trying to preserve any forensic evidence. There would appear to be some material left by paramedics, I would suggest, as they were treating the victims of this awful stabbing. So in time, when the resources are available, they will attend the scene and see if there's any forensic examination that could be done. We don't yet know, of course, whether any weapon has been retrieved. We might find those details out later on. Forensics these days are a huge part of modern investigations, and this scene clearly needs to be examined, even though to many of your viewers watching, it looks like a bit of a desolate area with not much there perhaps to be found. You would be surprised in terms of perhaps blood spatter, what that can tell us. We know that there's a helmet lying in the road, and all of these things need to be preserved because forensics are so important.
Yes, and as we understand, the two victims have been taken to a major trauma centre, which may indicate that the injuries could be quite severe. But Peter, you point out that only 2 weeks ago we saw three very young girls stabbed to death, and now this. And in the meantime, of course, there will have been other knife crime events as well. Is it time for this to be treated as an emergency?
Yes, it's way overdue. Hundreds upon hundreds of lives have been lost in recent years due to knife crime. And why is that? Well, in part because the police do not patrol the streets anymore on foot. They're always busy in cars going from one call to another call. So in essence, the streets have been surrendered to the criminals. It's why we've seen increasing lawlessness, not only with regards to knife crime, but crime like shoplifting and many others. It is time for the police to show the same resolve towards tackling this never-ending tide of bloodshed as they have done recently to the rioting. Get the police on the streets, regain some semblance of control, create deterrence to stop people from carrying knives. And a really good deterrent is to stop them, search them, seize the knife and get them in front of a court. Make sure that the courts support the police by handing down appropriate sentences. We've had far too many promises from politicians over the years, all of which rang hollow. We never got what they promised. Let's put as much effort, vigour, money into tackling the knife crime scourge that in many, many places is ruining the United Kingdom and taking lives.
Peter, what is the status of stop and search in London? I know that the mayor has been in conflict with the previous government over the utility of it, over the impression of stop and search among certain communities in our capital city. But how regularly is this tool of the police actually used?
Lick your finger, point it up into the air and see which way the wind is blowing, because politicians are continually changing their tune. Although many, as you say, like Sadiq Khan, have relished in seeing stop and search reduced. He has had to change his tune. And of course, Theresa May, as the most damaging Home Secretary and Prime Minister to policing in the history of modern policing, reduced stop and search hugely. And what has happened since then? Yes, knife crime has gone up. Incidences of people carrying knives has just increased hugely, and so many people now carry a knife routinely out onto the streets. Because stop and search has had a bit of a coloured, checkered past, should I say, that doesn't mean to say that police officers should shy away from doing it in the future. I know as a fact that many police officers, good operational police officers that once were, have now moved into back office jobs so they don't have to go out on the streets and commit stop and search, carry out stop and search, because they fear that their supervisors and managers won't support them, politicians won't support them, courts won't support them, and they might find themselves in trouble and losing their pensions and the such like. It's scandalous. Stop and search is a very, very valuable tool and needs to be used far more than it is now.
Now, we've seen crime go up to one of the top concerns now of the public when it comes to political concerns. Who should be held accountable?
Ultimately, It's the police's job to do stop and search, to tackle crime, to investigate crime. Of course, politicians of various colours and persuasions have a responsibility. There was 20,000 police jobs cut back in the age of austerity, but that's ancient history now. Policing needs to move on. It has shown that it can mobilise in large numbers when there's the political will, the money to pick up the overtime bill, and the policing will to do it. It needs to be done at the same sort of level now regarding knife crime. If it doesn't, it will amount to an absolute dereliction of duty and standing by while Britons die. That is not good enough. Police have to take this on as an absolute #1 unshakable priority.
Well, Peter Bleksley, you speak with great authority, and I'm sure many people will be nodding along sagely to what you have been saying. Thank you so much for joining us there, Peter Bleksley, formerly of the Metropolitan Police.
Yes, now after the break, we are going to be speaking to the shop owner of TWGT, one of the shops there in Leicester Square that I believe has its entrance currently cordoned off, or at least is very close to the incident there, as you can see. We're going to be speaking to that, of course, just to summarise. An 11-year-old girl and a 34-year-old woman have been taken to a major trauma centre after being stabbed in London's Leicester Square. We know that a man has been arrested and taken into custody. Stay with us. We're going to be live on the scene after this.